Hello everyone, welcome to my student tutorial. This is Ryan Brewer, and in this video I discuss a method for organizing your Python computer code by learning a simple mnemonic. I'm a student in a free online class offered by Rice University in partnership with Coursera. The class is called An Introduction to Interactive Programming in Python, and this video is based on material covered during the first 4 weeks of class. As a beginning programming student, I was struggling to remember the recommended structure for putting my Python code together when writing programs. After much debate, I created a mnemonic to help me remember the steps. As you may know, a mnemonic is a device like a phrase or acronym to help you remember something else. For example, in many American schools, students learn the phrase, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." This phrase is a mnemonic used to teach order of operation to young math students. For example, the P in please helps us remember that parentheses should always be evaluated first, and the E in excuse reminds us that exponents are evaluated next, and so on with multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Well, in today's mnemonic, we're going to be looking at 7 steps to, a structured program. And those 7 steps are represented by this mnemonic. Galloping horses can hurdle 4 rails simultaneously. Wow. Jumping horses. Why jumping horses, you might ask? Well, mnemonics work well when they are easy to remember. And I think you'll agree that this one creates a strong mental image to make sure you remember all the words in the right order. We are going to use this phrase to become better programmers in Python. This phrase helps us remember, again, the 7 steps for Python programming, specifically within the Simple GUI module. And in the second week of class, Scott Rixner presented this module in a lecture about the Simple GUI module. While this concept was introduced a couple of weeks ago, it is still relevant to all the other projects remaining in this course, including this week's assignment to create the game Pong. While the course has provided templates to help us remember the structure of a program, let's face it, we won't always have a template in the real world, so it is important to commit this structure to memory. Let's break these steps down for better understanding. The G in galloping represents global, as in define your global variables. As we learned in week 2, global variables can be referenced by any function. That's why it's important that they are defined from the very beginning. If you think of your program as a machine, then a global variable is an important gear in that machine. This variable has the same value throughout the entire program. When a function modifies the value of a global variable, that change is seen by the entire program. So remember, the word galloping reminds us to set and define our global variables. The next word in our phrase is horses. The H in horses stands for helper. A helper function performs a specific task that can be called by the program whenever it's needed. Now, helper functions can be used to make your code shorter, easier to read, and easier to update. The elements of a helper function work together to perform a certain task. Often, this is a redundant task that is used throughout your program. If you were to analyze your overall program, you might see some redundant code appearing in 2 or more places. This is a prime opportunity to substitute helper functions. Just define the helper function and replace all the redundant code with calls to the helper function. Since the program responds to these calls by running the helper function, you'll end up with the same result, but with less overall code, which is more elegant, easier to read, and easier to modify. Helper functions can be the real workhorses in your programs. So remember, horses stands for helper functions. The next word, can, starts with C, which stands for classes. We haven't covered classes at this point in the course, so we're not going to spend any time on them here. But at least when we do learn more about them, you'll remember exactly where to insert those in your program structure. The next word in our phrase is hurdle, and the H stands for handler functions. Remember, a handler function is tied to an event handler and only executes when that event occurs, such as the click of a mouse button. It's sort of like a Ruby Goldberg machine. Perhaps you've seen one of these ridiculous machines in a drawing. This one has the purpose of making fresh squeezed orange juice, and it goes through an amazing number of actions to accomplish this simple task. This one is accomplished by frightening an octopus. Well, if this diagram were a handler function, it would be executing all these actions, letters A, B, C, and so on, all the way through letter O, but only when the specified event had occurred. In this case, the trigger event that will call this handler function is the empty bottle being lifted from the windowsill. In your code, the event will likely be something more common, like clicking a mouse button or moving the mouse or simply pressing a button on the keyboard. Now the next word in our mnemonic is for, and the F stands for frame. A single line of code is enough to create a frame for the simple GUI canvas. We just have to specify how large the frame should be within the parameters of that code. Next, the R in Rails stands for register, as in register the event handler. While we have defined our event handler, we have not yet registered it. So our program knows what to do, it just doesn't know when to do it. The line of code that registers the event handler tells the program what to wait for, whether it be the movement of a mouse, or the press of a computer key, or even the appearance of a drawing canvas. Granted, this canvas is a little different than the other two because we're not waiting on the user to trigger this event. However, we still need to register this event in order to use the canvas. In Mini Project 4, we'll need to register the drawing canvas as well as the key down and key up events for our Pong paddles. Our final letter is S, which stands for start. The Pong game will require us to start a frame and perhaps a timer, which could control the velocity of our ball. Let's recap. Although we are building event-driven code, the underlying instructions are initially read and implemented from the beginning of the program to the end. That is, from the top to the bottom. So the basic premise is that we need to define anything up front, that is toward the top of this chart, that we might want to use later on, toward the bottom of this chart. Let me illustrate this. This is specifically why your global variables should be defined first, so that we can use them inside helper functions. With these constructs in place, you can then use both global variables and helper functions to create your handler functions. As we wrap up, keep in mind that while this lesson was based around the simple GUI module, you may be able to apply these constructs and ideas to other applications as well. So as you write your next program, remember that before you run it, you need to gallop. That is, galloping horses that can hurdle 4 rails simultaneously. This has been Ryan Brewer describing my horse mnemonic guide to programming. Hope it helps you as much as it's helping me. See you next time.